We named this Helderburg Ragnar, and I'm going to let you see the meaning behind the name because it's much deeper than you would believe. For 2 days in Houston, a private setting becomes a quiet gallery for Helderburg commissions. Guests will experience a curated selection in person. This is a private, invitation-only gathering. Capacity is limited to preserve a calm, unhurried experience for those considering a future Helderburg commission in Houston. Hi, I'm Paul, and this is Lucy, and today we're going to talk about Ragnar. Ragnar does have a deep meaning, and if you've watched a number of my videos, you know every single Helderburg has a name, and it also has a meaning. And before I get into the meaning of Ragnar and how we came up with that name, let me tell you how I come up with the names in general. Well, again, if you've watched my videos or you've read some of my stories that I've written, you'll know I'm a big poetry buff, that I love poetry. I read a lot of poetry every night. Well, I'll say almost every night that I'm reading poetry, but I also love to write poetry. And Ragnar is a name where I worked with the client on the name, and this client, we have a very unique bond, a really good relationship. And we've done trips together, and we have trips planned together. And it was a wonderful, lack of a better word, a wonderful banter. And when we were talking about names, and it just came together perfectly. Because Ragnar, as I show you around this build, you will see everything has a purpose. Everything was meant. And just because we could do something more, we didn't do it. And I think that is, what we would call quiet luxury or timelessness. I think that's the better term. That just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. Because when you start to overdo a design and you make it loud, what happens is you distract away from it. You distract away from the different elements of a build. And that's true for anything, whether it's a fountain pen or a mechanical watch, a camera, anything, clothing. To be able to make it timeless, it simply can't be loud. And another thing that I've seen about products that are timeless or items that are timeless and that stay with you for a lifetime and become an heirloom product that you pass on, not only is it not loud, but it all has meaning, and you don't overdo it for the sake of overdoing it. And that's exactly what we've done with Ragnar. So starting with the color, this is a color that we've done 2 other times, so now we are retiring this color. This is not a color you're going to see again on another Helderburg. We're done with it, and I think it's so fitting that we've basically closed the book on this color specifically for Ragnar, for a very special individual. And this individual he has the same passion and the same love for not only classic Land Rovers, but cameras and photography and a lot of things. And he's already got trips planned with it too. But the color is brilliant. The color is interesting in how it takes on a lot of different shades. Like right now, there's not one bit of sun in the sky. It's very cloudy, it's very foggy. It actually looks like the Scottish Highlands right now, the way you would visualize it. And the color still has a wonderful pop to it. It has a deep metallic look to it. And we're not even finished with it. It hasn't even gone through the final buff yet. But I wanted to show it to you. I wanted to give you the opportunity to see this color and see Ragnar. And again, we're retiring this color. We're done. We're still not even done with the bumper. We're still building the bumper because, again, if you watch my videos, you know that the vast majority of parts that go on a Helderburg are made, and we make those in-house. They're made by craftsmen. They are not off of the shelf. They are not mass produced. So the bumper that will be on here is the bumper that you've seen on a number of Helderbergs, where it arches up, where it has the high approach angle, and it has the arch here and the arch there, and it has the oval circle holes in it, and it has the Helderberg logo right here. And that will be the final touch on the exterior, other than polishing the paint. But with the paint not even being polished, just the color. And when the sun hits it, again, it takes on all of these different vibrant colors, and sitting in the shade is spectacular. And I've said this many a times too, that you really truly have to see a Helderberg in person to appreciate all of the fine details, and not just the color, but the fit and the finish and the perfection of the lines, and how every part has been disassembled. And that's how we actually do the painting. This piece is separate from this piece, from that piece, from this piece. And of course, I always talk about the billet aluminum with the Helderberg logo in there. And it's exciting watching a Helderberg come together. And I feel like I'm just kind of going down a path right now, a rabbit hole. So let me come back to what Ragnar and the meaning of Ragnar. And meaning is really the simplicity, but the perfection. And what I mean by that everything was chosen. So things that Chris chose, because he's going to do a lot of photo expeditions, a lot of cross-country trips with this build. And therefore, that meant he was probably going to end up doing a lot of off-roading. In fact, Chris and I and Mike, we all went to Montana. If you haven't seen that video, you should definitely watch that video. And we drove Bruno. And Bruno is not this color. Bruno has much more of a green, which is the same color as Enzo. But if you haven't seen that video, watch that video. And Chris did the majority of the driving as we were driving in, it was Montana. I just needed to make sure. And he really got an understanding and a feeling for a classic Land Rover, and understanding what it is and what it's not. And one of the things that he determined that he wanted to do is, because he is going to do a lot of off-roading as he's trying to, or as he's getting to his destinations, to set up his 4x5 view camera. And he's even promised he's going to do a video showing one of his expeditions with his 4x5 view camera and Ragnar. The point that I'm making is the very wide arches. This is not a standard on Helderberg. Normally they're a little smaller, but again, Ragnar was a purpose built specifically for Chris and what he wanted to do. But as he's doing these very steep rock climbs, and he's going to need approach angle, he's going to need to be able to have all the articulation that's going to be needed. So again, wide arches is one of the things that we've done on it. But just kind of moving back and talking about everything on Ragnar, when we get into the interior, that's where you're going to really understand that everything that was chosen was very specific, down to even the window cranks. And that's the kind of beauty that I think a classic Land Rover, specifically a Helderberg, brings, is because we make so many of these parts that it becomes a purpose built. So Ragnar, purpose built, but now let's take a look at the interior so I can explain what happened there. I'm at a loss. I got so many thoughts rolling through my mind right now that I don't even know where to start. So let me just start with saying that the interior it's not diamond stitch, but it's equally, let's say that again, equally, I can't even talk today, equally luxurious is diamond stitch, or maybe even more so. And I think it's because of the simplicity of it that we did the Puma style seats, which these seats are extremely comfortable. They don't have the big bolsters. They're more of an all-day type of seat, which again is part of the purpose, because Chris is going to do cross-country trips. The leather though, just by feeling it, and you can feel the thickness and how thick this leather is. and the texture to it. And when after it was completed and I'm looking at it, and Chris hasn't seen it personally, and I'm explaining the leather, lack of a better term, actually I'm not even going to say that how I described the leather to him, because I was talking about an animal, a critter that would be known to have very thick skin, but it's very supple too. But again, it's thick. And the color is understated, but it's very elegant. It's very gentlemanly, like, is what it feels like. And I could just kind of go on and on. There's a lot of different elements in here. And in fact, I've been driving Ragnar all day today, out taking pictures, feeling inspired by my mechanical film camera, of course, and film. And, which brings an interesting point too, that the first time that I met Chris and we started having more and more conversations, it wasn't always about Defenders. It was about all kinds of stuff, and all of these similar interests started coming up. One of them being photography and film photography, and talking about Hasselblads. And he came and visited me, and he brought his Hasselblad, and because he has film Hasselblad, he has digital Hasselblad, and even down to the point that this has to be 1 in 100,000, at least 1 in 100,000. But he brought his bag, and funny enough, his bag is a fog bag, which these bags are pretty rare unless you're really into photography, because it's two individuals, Nigel and B. They're an older couple, and they hand make these bags, and they make these in Italy. And so it's just interesting, all of these similarities. And when he was designing the interior, one of the things that he said, I don't want the large screen. In fact, he didn't want any stereo at all. All he wanted was a Marshall speaker. But then as we talked about it more, and I said, well, you're really going to want to be able to use, Onyx navigation. And I understand you don't want the large screen, that you want the mechanical, the analog feel that we both thoroughly enjoy. But then we decided together that maybe the Marshall speaker wasn't the ideal scenario, because the sound on it, quite frankly, the sound quality is quite poor. So, and it just kind of felt like too, with Ragnar and a build of this quality, of this magnitude, that it needed to have a proper audio system. But we did do a Kenwood head unit. It does have a CD player, which is very classic. In fact, Rolls-Royce still has CD players and new ones, but very classic. But then, of course, we did the handmade Focal speakers from France, and the amplifier and the subwoofer, just to create a really nice audio system. And so he didn't miss out on that. The other aspect, though, too, that I thought this was Chris's idea 100%, which I thought was really nice, is if you notice the instrument binnacle around the gauges here, this piece is metal. It's normally we do that in leather, but that is metal. So that's a formed metal and painted the exterior color. And then, of course, we brought the gauges out a little further, where we put spacers behind it. And it's just to kind of give it that utilitarian look, versus being completely luxurious inside, to just give it that little pop, I guess you could say. And then as I'm looking here too, that I look across the headliner, it's dual panoramic glass, and it just brightens up the cabin. So let's go to the second row, because again, more similarities happened, and it just made a lot of sense. So let me explain the second row. So this probably doesn't surprise you, but one of the conversations that we had, actually it's an ongoing conversation, and we share pictures with one another, that we text pictures back and forth, sharing our children. And when I say our children, you possibly know my only children are dogs. And Chris also loves dogs. He has 2 Dobermans. And as we talked about, because either you get it or you don't when you have a bond with dogs that is maybe even unhealthy bond. And he wanted to make sure that there was comfort for his two dogs, because when he does his cross-country trip, of course, his two dogs, they're going to go with him. And for the simple fact that their entire short little lives, they've been with him pretty much nonstop. So you can only imagine the stress they would have. So that's where the discussion came of what we call the 60-40 bench split seat. And this provides a nice flat surface for the dogs to be able to be here and be close to Chris while he's driving. Of course, I have a really sinking suspicion that one of the dogs is the more dominant one, like mine, Lucy, and that one dog will be in the front seat and the other dog will be in the back seat. And there will be no thing of calling shotgun. It's just like, for example, Lucy just goes to the front and Leo says, no problem, whatever you want. Yeah, all right, princess. And that's going to be the same way with Chris. But again, the 60-40 bench split seat was chosen because of his two Dobermans, and they needed a place to lay. And one of the recommendations, one of the things that I've done too for my dogs is just their flat board. You can put a flat board here that runs across and it's padded. You put the dog bed on it and it just creates a really nice base. Another thing that you can do too is there's the canvas hang wraps that hook onto the back of the seats and then folds down, and it creates like this more or less a, what would you call it? A hammock, kind of a hammock system is what it does for the dog too. So there's options here versus the bucket seats. If we did the 2 buckets or the 3 buckets, because if we do 2 buckets, it's the center console, it's raised higher, the subwoofer's under it. And then if it's the 3 buckets, I mean, they have the big bolsters, not comfortable for a dog. And Leo can attest to that, because heaven forbid that the dogs end up in the cargo area. That's not where they're going to go. That's where the gear goes. And again, the panoramic roofs here, these were really chosen for the dogs more than anything else. I mean, they also provide a really nice effect where it brightens up the cabin slightly, ever so slightly. It's even if the sun was really coming down, it's not going to be overly bright. This is a dual pane glass. It's so it's 2 sheets of glass. It has a gas in the center. It's tinted, so it doesn't make it very bright. And by the way, the panoramic glass roofs, that's another thing that, again, all purpose built, that it was important that we built everything around the lifestyle that he lives and that will continue to live, specifically with Ragnar. So now let's look at the very rear, the cargo area, because that's where the gear goes, and we'll talk about size and what you can fit back there. So before I get into the cargo area, I want to just talk a little bit about the bumper. Again, this was chosen, and for the reason is this style of a bumper gives you a much larger step. So as you're getting in and out of the vehicle, or the dogs are getting out of the vehicle, but the dogs are not going to be back here, I know that, but just a much larger step, a lot more steady getting in and out is what it does. It also just really gives it a nice clean line too. And even though we have a bumper like this, that does not mean that we cannot have a receiver if we want to tow something. We can definitely do that. A receiver is added on. It's just it's a steel base, and then has the receiver hitch, and then it takes a standard, receiver more or less. So, and again, it could be wired for a trailer and all that. So, but that's not needed for Chris. He's not going to be towing anything, but I just want you to understand that that's a possibility. One of the things that we talked about is the center-facing the center-facing benches. And this is nostalgia, 100%. That when we're designing, we always talk about the center-facing benches. And it seems like people that have never even seen a classic Defender, seems to know about the center-facing bench. And when we're building it, it's like, oh, we're going to do the center-facing bench. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. But again, Chris when we were doing the design, he said, I really don't need the center facing benches, and I'd rather have the room. Do you agree? And I said, yeah, well, I agree, because when I built Elizabeth, the 110, which was my personal build, which you can see on the website, in that beautiful, and named after Queen Elizabeth, by the way, I did not do center facing benches because I wanted more room for storage and all that. And then I ended up regretting it for a number of different reasons. And I said, Chris, I think we should just do center facing benches for the simple reason that you'll have them and they're easy to come out. The 4 bolts, they come out. They do have seat belts too, so there's 4 seat belts back here. But it's better to have it and not need it versus not have it and end up needing it, because you never know when you're going to have more friends, more family that visit, and of course they want you to drive, so it's better just to have it. The other reason just to have it too is, as you probably know if you've watched the videos, leather for a Helderburg is tanned to order. That this is not leather that's off the shelf, that we work together, we choose the leather, and then the tannery creates the leather. So if we didn't do the center facing benches at the time that we did the rest of the seats, and he came back at a later time and he said, can we go ahead and get that? There's going to be a variation in the leather. It's not going to be exact, and that's just simply not going to be a Helderburg. It's simply not going to be acceptable. So I said, let's just do it now. You'll have it. You can pull it out if you don't need it, but you always have it. So that's the reason for the center facing benches. Another thing about the cargo area of a classic Land Rover Defender, if you didn't know, that these were built for farmers. They were built to be as work trucks, and you can fit a 4x8 sheet of plywood in the rear, or a sheetrock or whatever it is. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that that's the way it's designed. Of course, we do have the bench seats and everything that takes up a little bit of room, but those bench seats, the 60-40 split, do fold forwards, so it gives you more cargo space back here too, which is also a benefit. And then I think that's pretty much about it. I mean, leather on the rear door, and normally when we're talking about having dogs and dogs being in the vehicles a lot of times I make the suggestion we go with the hard plastic instead, because there was always a concern of leather being scratched. But that's not the case on a Helderburg, that it would take a serious amount of pressure and some pretty sharp claws to scratch Helderburg leather. So that's the rear of Ragnar, purpose built. Nothing was put on here, or nothing was actually added for the sake of adding it. It's all for a reason, and I know Chris is absolutely going to enjoy it. And as I said earlier, I simply can't wait until he does his epic video with his 4x5 camera as he's traveling cross country with Ragnar and his 2 bedrooms.